This beautiful woodland setting is actually a small yard in the middle of Tulsa. It's the home of Tom King and his family, and a few years ago they decided they were tired of just a plain grassy front lawn. They wanted their front yard to feel like a forest, and so they began thinking about what kind of feelings they would like to have when they walked out the front door. They wanted some tall deciduous trees to give them shade. They wanted some smaller specimen trees that had interest with fall color or interesting flowers and so forth. They wanted some woodland shrubs, some ornamental grasses, ground covers, and a lot of rocks to make them feel like they were walking along a woodland path. Now, the process of converting a suburban lawn into a forest like this has taken the Kings 3 years of a lot of planning and hard labor. The first year, they just planted trees, 3 large trees. There were 2 lacebark elms and a Chinese pistache. They planted those above grade. The next year they came in, killed out the rest of the lawn with Roundup, brought in 25 truckloads of soil amendments, worked those in, and started developing the pathways using large rocks and mulch. And one thing we want to point out is that the rocks are all very carefully placed. They're not just lined end to end to line the pathways like runway lights at an airport. They're carefully placed. Some of them look like they've been here for years and years. They have that aged look, and if you've ever walked out in a forest, you'll notice that it looks like soil has filled in behind the rocks. There might be a slight amount of erosion out in front of the rocks, and they look like they've just grown up from the soil. Now, if we look on back over here, they have planted the 3 large trees for shade and an overstory feel, and then they filled in with some trees that are considered temporary trees. For instance, the redbud right here can be bought fairly reasonably at a nursery. It grows fairly rapidly, and it's a temporary tree out in front to shade the Solomon seal right here until the Chinese pistache back behind it gets large enough to provide cooling shade for the Solomon seal and some other herbaceous perennials that need a cooler temperature than we normally have in full sun in Oklahoma. To my left here is a large azalea that is, again, temporary. Behind it are some ferns and some hostas that need shade, need cool conditions, and this is providing that for them until the dogwood right here gets large enough to provide that shade. Back behind it are some original hollies that were there when the yard was first developed, and that is some Chinese holly and some others that were left behind to provide some depth and a deep green feeling back in that corner of the yard. Well, we've come nearly full circle around this path that meanders around the King's yard, and there are a few final points I'd like to make. Everything is in asymmetric curves. They've chosen some unusual plants to put around the yard and some not so unusual ones. Look at the curve of this redbud. They've let that curl on down around and meet you as you exit the path onto this nice stone pathway. Now, if you're considering a landscape like this, keep in mind that it's not without its own share of maintenance. Remember when we first started this series on noteworthy small landscapes, Mrs. Tucker pointed out that in her yard, although she also did not have to run a lawnmower every week, she had to disbud the flowers to keep them blooming. And Tom has pointed out to me that trees such as this redbud that have a lot of seed pods, drop those in the fall, they go through the winter, and he has seedlings to pull up throughout the season to keep the yard from becoming too overgrown. One final point I'd like to make is that the Kings took a lot of time in laying stone leading along the pathway up to their front porch. And here we have a transition zone. What do you do when you run into the concrete front porch? Well, Tom spent several days looking for a rock that had a time-worn look and feel to it. And that's what he's achieved right here. It looks like people have stepped up to this porch for years and years. And again, that took some time and some planning. Well, as fall approaches and you have a little more time to reflect on your own landscape, think about how it reflects your personality, but also what feelings you want it to evoke as you walk around your yard. And maybe you'll come up with some landscape like this, or one that reflects your own personality.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.